Hello, this is Dr. Eric Bricker from AHealthcareZ, and this is the How to Sell in Healthcare podcast. Today we're going to be talking about mid-sales funnel activities to move your prospects along. Now, what do I mean by that? So, in the previous podcast, we've talked about prospecting and initial 5-minute phone calls, and then we've talked about 30-minute, whether it be in-person presentations or phone calls or webinars to do a more, quote-unquote formal presentation. Okay, so we're done with that. And in this episode, then it's like, okay, well, what's next? So typically the call to action after that 30-minute, and if, let's say it's an hour, what have you, is depending upon the client, the prospect, there are various things that you're going to want to have in your toolbox as sort of a next step to educate them in the buying process about your product or service. And that could be, one, an opportunity assessment. And so this is where you would want to have some degree of sort of custom data about the prospect that you can then apply your analytics to. Now, what do I mean by that? Obviously, since we're dealing with healthcare, oftentimes it's in the form of claims, and you would look at their historical claims, and then you would apply your solution, algorithm, analytics, etc., to those claims and say, okay, well, if you had our service for this 6-month, 12-month, 2-year period of time historically on your claims, this is how much of those claims we feel like we could impact and how much we could then save you. Now, this is oftentimes very helpful for both the broker consultant and for the employer, because what you're doing is there are going to be advocates for your product or service within the client buying team or committee. And you're going to need to, it's almost like being an attorney. You need to build a case along with that client advocate in order to prove your case to the rest of the people on the buying committee to essentially commit budget to your solution and therefore make the sale. And that assessment is additional ammo, or is part of then building that case for that client advocate. Now, here's the challenge, is that oftentimes you have this sort of quote-unquote wish list of client data, and it's hard to get. So the carriers almost never want to give up any type of data, and you might have certain data fields that you want, and they might not want to give you those data fields. And there's a couple of ways to get around that, because the key to the assessment is speed. Because if your assessment takes 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks to happen, well, then whatever momentum you have created from the initial 5-minute phone call and 30-minute phone call is going to die quickly if you cannot deliver that assessment, ideally within a week. And I'd maybe give you 2, but ideally you'd want to be able to deliver that assessment within a week. Now, how do you make it happen fast? You would want to build off of any existing reporting that they already have, for several reasons. One, you don't want to have to create any more work for them to do, because if providing you with data for an assessment creates more work for them to do, well, they just might be so busy that they never get around to it. And then 2, if they have to create some type of like special report coming from their TPA or their carrier or their PBM or whomever, well, then they have to deal with the administrative account management people on the carrier PBM side, and then they're busy and they got stuff to do, yada, yada, yada. And then you might have to have an authorization in terms of a couple forms of authorizations. You might have to sign a data privacy agreement with whoever is providing the data, whether it's the employer or the carrier. And you also might have to sign a business associate agreement to the extent that there's any, PHI and you're an extension of the plan, in order to be able to do the assessment as well. So then you're like, okay, well then we got to run this through legal. There's technical issues in terms of the data, but then there's also, legal issues in terms of what contractually needs to be signed before it's handed over. You don't want to deal with that. So to the extent that you can work off either existing de-identified data reports that they have, or even if they have like summary reporting of course, all employers already have gobs and gobs of summary reporting, and oftentimes the employers don't really know how to best use that summary reporting. And there's actually a lot of very helpful information off of that summary reporting that you can use. So what are some examples of that? Like, you just need things like number of people on the plan. You just need things like maybe weekly, monthly, or quarterly claims paid. You might have some, high-level diagnosis or CPT breakdown. You might even have some facility breakdowns, like X amount spent at XYZ facility in the first quarter, X amount spent at 1, 2, 3 facility during the quarter. So might be some facility-specific cost information in there as well. So what does that mean? That means that ideally when you're providing your assessment, it's best not to create your assessment beforehand. I mean, obviously you can create the, full enchilada, like ideal assessment beforehand. However, what you really want to do is you want to have various versions of that assessment that can be created that are quote unquote dumbed down versions of that assessment based upon the type of data that's available from the client. And that was a super helpful way of addressing the need to build a case by the client and the broker consultant as well. And by the way, doing that assessment, it's not going to be like, hey, assessment and then close. I mean, sometimes that happens, but very rarely. The assessment is just another step in the buying process of building your case to make the sale. Okay, so don't try to hang your hat 100% on just this assessment. It is just part of the overall case that you are building. Now, so fine, so that's one in regards to the data. Two, you need to make your assessment aesthetically pleasing. You got to make it look good to the eye. You have to make it look real professional. Now, you can deliver it. Obviously, many assessments can be delivered just soft copy in a PDF, but you want to have it, have the company's name on the front. You're going to want to have a nice cover, page. You're ideally going to want to have it in color, and there's going to be charts and graphs and graphics and images to break up the text, so you're not just sending them like charts or graphs plus big blocks of paragraphs of prose. So my point is that you want to make it aesthetically pleasing and visually easy to digest quickly, because a lot of the people, whether it be the controller or the CFO or the purchasing department, I mean, they're going to look over this thing incredibly fast. And so it might even make sense to have like an executive summary at the beginning of the assessment, and then obviously have more detail behind that. But just know that you're not going to, you're going to create this wonderful assessment and you think that the reader is going to take the time to read it. They might not take the time to read it. They're so busy that they, to the extent that they can, check the box on the assessment piece, and you're going to have different people reading it at different levels of detail. So again, that executive summary section is super helpful for it. Okay, so a completely separate educational next step mid-funnel that the employer could do. Oh, and by the way, the last thing I'll say too is that oftentimes the broker or the consultant can provide the reporting, and if they can do that, that's super helpful, because to the extent that the employer can offload that, just hey, get these reports over to XYZ vendor, that just makes it a lot easier for the employer if they can offload it to the broker or the consultant to be able to do that. So that's another reason why you want to have a positive working relationship with the broker or consultant. Even if you went direct to the large employer to prospect, you're still going to want to do that you're still going to want to form that positive relationship with the broker and consultant, because they need to help get you the assessment data in order for you to do the assessment. Okay, we also kind of stratified our assessments by the size of the group. So of course, if it's a fully insured group, you're never going to get detailed claims data. If it's a self-funded group that is like, maybe 1,000 or 2,000 employees or 500 employees, maybe we'll get some degree of claims data. For if you have a 10,000, 20,000, 50,000, 100,000 person group, they might already have, whether it's called a data lake or a database already that they have, and it might be very sophisticated. So you're going to want to have varying levels of sophistication that are also available based upon the size company as well, because those really big companies are also going to be able to force the carrier to give them more detailed data than just a 500 or 1,000 person self-funded group. Now, the next sort of area, obviously, to go to is references. And it's interesting. I would say that going to a reference for a small or a mid-market group after just the 30-minute call was actually fairly common for us, because the group and the broker consultant, they don't necessarily need to have a ton more data or information from you. What they're essentially doing, so there's the sort of timing temporarily, chronologically during the sales cycle, where at the beginning fit is the most important thing, and that's where you're doing your 5-minute, your 30-minute conversations to see if the solution actually applies to them. And then the next phase during the buying process, a very much a mid-funnel part of the process, is assessing risk. And so assessing risk for a small and mid-sized employer is oftentimes done through reference calls. Okay, so this is where being able to maintain those positive relationships, even as a salesperson, being able to dig your well before you're thirsty and maintain those relationships with your customers that you've already sold, such that you can go back to them and ask them to be references, is super important. And it's important to have your references. Obviously, the name of the person, the name of the company, their contact information, but it's also important to have sort of a database of references within your customer base by industry, and also by geographic location, and by size of company. Those were probably the three areas. So we talked to a company and they'd be like, hey, we're in trucking. It'd be great to talk to another trucking business. And that other trucking business might not be in the same metro area or even state, but they just want to talk to another trucking business. Or they might be, a rural employer, or they might be in a particular town, let's say Cleveland or St. Louis or Seattle, and like, well, I really like to talk to another, because a lot of HR people know each other in the HR community, and they want to talk to somebody who's in their same geographic location. And then sometimes it's just helpful to have another company that's their size. So they could be a trucking company that has 15,000 people, and you might have a 500-person trucking company, but they're just like, look, yeah, it's kind of helpful, but it'd really be helpful to have another 15,000-person company that I could talk to, even if it's in a different industry. So being able to have a searchable database, whether you use Salesforce.com or Excel or something else, some other CRM, in order to keep track of your customer base, right? Because you're going to use a CRM not only for your prospects and your leads, but you're also going to use a CRM for your existing clients and your account management team as well, to be able to provide those references. And when we would talk with references, we would, of course, ask them if they could be a reference in advance, and we would set the expectation of, one, that we wouldn't wear them out, and that two, that we would notify them when we had shared their name as a reference, so that they wouldn't get a call or an email just out of the blue and they had no idea where it was coming from, so that we could contact them and give them the heads up to say, hey, look, we've given you as a reference, and we would say the name of the person, such that if they were getting a call from Mary or Bob, that they would, one, they would take the call, or, if they had an assistant, their assistant would make sure that the call got through to them, etc. So you want to be able to manage the expectations of the person who's providing the reference as well. And of course, we would do nice things for them as well, whether it be thank you cards or gift baskets or things like that, to show our appreciation for them to be a continued reference for us. Now, some folks wanted 1, some folks wanted 2, some folks wanted 3. We would always start out, try to being at the low end, so that we wouldn't have to burn out a ton of our references with giving everybody 3. And oftentimes, actually, it was the broker or consultant who would do the reference check, and not the employers themselves. Interestingly, a lot of times folks would ask for references and they would never end up contacting them, and we would still close the sale. I almost wonder if they just wanted us to, they just felt confident enough, or they just wanted to prove that we had clients that were referenceable, or maybe they just never got around to it because they were busy. And, that being the case, just know that there's going to be some folks that are going to ask for reference, and they're never going to contact them, and you'll still be able to close the sale. Okay, now, so that's number 2. So number 1 is the assessment. Number 2 is the reference. Number 3 is a site visit. So it's great to have them, especially if you're there in the same city as your headquarters, or if you have multiple offices, as one of the other offices as well, is to do a site visit so that they can actually see the work location. And if, obviously these are all, obviously if you're doing an on-site near-site clinic, if you want to have them come to see another on-site near-site clinic you run, well, then that makes total sense, and you have the ability to showcase that. Otherwise, you're typically going to be in an office setting. And we did a lot of preparatory work around a highly orchestrated office visit in terms of being able to showcase various aspects of our company. Because an office visit is not a tour of the office. It's really an opportunity to really get to know the company better, and operations better, and IT better, and finance better. And it was, especially for larger employer clients, I would say we started doing site visits for typically companies with more than 1,000 employees. That was sort of the threshold. Typically, we would not have any companies with less than 1,000 employees want to do site visits. We certainly had many companies with more than 1,000 employees that did not want to do a site visit. But it tended to be the larger companies that wanted to do the site visits. And typically it would be a combination of the broker consultant and the employer. And not only was it a great opportunity to sell to the employer, but it was a great opportunity to showcase your company for the broker or consultant, such that they have other groups that they work with, and for them to have actually been able to see the location and the operations was great. Now, a few things around that. One is that it's obviously important to be honest about what it is that your office is like. You don't want to, and your employees, you don't want to hire fake employees or have a fake temporary office and yada, yada, yada. So it needs to be sincere. And in this age of pandemic, if it makes sense to do like a virtual tour where you walk around with a laptop or just doing FaceTime or what have you, then that might make more sense. And we really found that the decision in terms of office space was obviously it had a lot to do with operations and had a lot to do with finance in terms of being able to afford the space, but we also took into account what the office site visits would be like when choosing our office space, so that it was the type of building that would instill confidence. So that same sort of mentality, why banks are in, whether it be significant brick buildings, et cetera, et cetera. So just know that you're going to want to have that site visit. It's almost a subconscious thing that people are very visual. We would do all sorts of sort of special, nice things for them in association with their site visits. So that's another good thing to do, especially for the much larger prospects. So the other mid-funnel things that can do would be, example reporting. That is another piece of collateral that is very helpful to have, is to show them what a utilization or a savings report would look like. Oftentimes those are done monthly or quarterly. So example reporting is very helpful. Oftentimes groups will require an eligibility file or maybe even a claims feed in order for you to provide your service. The sales team is going to want to have the file specs for the eligibility file and any data files. And again, the best thing to do is to be like, hey, we're flexible about how we take, and the division of your technology department is called ETL, extraction, transfer, load, in terms of the frequency of the downloads and how they take them, and et cetera, et cetera. But it's important for the sales staff to be trained and have an understanding of that, because believe it or not, there are people within HR, because HR has to deal with feeds all the time out to various vendors, and they're going to have people that, sort of specialize in HRIS and their HRIS system. So you can actually get some pretty detailed questions about the file transfer process, et cetera, during the sales process. And that's good, right? It's a positive buy sign if they're actually thinking about the sometimes cantankerous process for transferring eligibility files or data files. That's a good thing. That's a positive buy sign, right? So you can't just say, oh, well, it's our technology people. No. Because you don't want to have to get the technology person on the phone or in the meeting with the prospect every time they got questions about the eligibility file. I mean, you want to be the conciliary. You want to sell them through that process as another opportunity for you to build your relationship with them. So you're going to want to have the very nice looking data spec documents for the eligibility file and any data feeds there, along with lots of language in there about how you can be flexible in terms of the types of fields you get and the route and the frequency with which you get them. So also employee communication piece, example employee communication pieces are also a great mid-funnel piece to send on to them, whether it be home mailers or example emails or example text or example table tents or example wallet cards, etc. If your solution has an app that is used by the employees, then doing an app demo during that, you might only do like screenshots of the app during the initial 30-minute to 1 hour presentation, but you actually want to do a more detailed deep dive live demo of the app with them, or if you have like an online portal, that would as well, that could be another one as well. So and you do not dump all of this on them at once. So here we've named a whole bunch of things that you can use mid-funnel, and what you're going to do is you're going to say, many people in your situation like to see one or a handful of items to further educate themselves about our solution. Some people like to see an opportunity assessment based upon your data. And if they say, oh, yeah, that's great, we would love to do that. Okay, don't give them all the other options. Just be like, okay, great, let's do that. And you focus on kind of dripping out one thing at a time. Don't be like, well, we're going to do the assessment, and we're going to give you all the communication materials, and we're going to give you the specs for the file feeds, and we're going to do the example report. No. You do not do all of it at once. You want to drip it out, because what's going to happen is that mid-funnel, this is when sales stall. You think, oh, 30-minute presentation, they're going to want to totally keep moving forward with this, and I don't understand. I'm calling them and I'm emailing them, and they're not responding to my phone calls or my emails. Like, what's going on? Like, are they not interested anymore? And the answer is that they might still be highly interested. They're just busy, right? I mean, the typical HR person, benefits person, even the typical broker, I mean, they are fighting fires on a daily basis. So you just have to understand that you are not necessarily their priority, especially if they're thinking about something that's going to be implemented, 9-10 months in the future, which most of these things are. The very early stages are going to be, 9 to 12 months before they would ever, go live with it. So they're not necessarily going to have the hot seat underneath them to move forward. So you're going to use these various pieces as excuses to get them back on the phone, or have another meeting with them, or have another webinar with them, so that every time you're every time you're following up with them, you are dripping additional pieces of information with an opportunity. Again, they're super busy. Get on, hey, can we, here's an example report. Hey, let's get on a 10-minute phone call. We'd love to be able to kind of walk you through this real quick. Here's our specs. We would give example opportunity assessments. So say like, okay, let me give you an example opportunity assessment. It's got executive summary for the, it's blinded. It doesn't have the name of the company on it, so that they can see, if they do an opportunity assessment, they can see what the deliverable will look like. Okay, so that is super important to keep things moving along. And you had to do 12 contacts, 7 emails, 5 phone calls in the beginning just to get the process started. You're going to need to do the continued follow-up mid-funnel to keep the sale moving, and you're going to need a reminder system in a CRM. Again, we use Salesforce.com. Doesn't matter which CRM you're using, but salespeople are notorious for forgetting to follow up and dropping the ball. And is it possible to have a absolutely fantastic reaction to an initial 30-minute call by both the broker and the group? And if you as a salesperson fail to follow up, will the sale not go anywhere? The answer is absolutely. Like, if you think you're going to do that 30-minute presentation and they're going to follow up with you, that's crazy. Okay, even if they were like jumping out of their chair excited, you still have to follow up with them, because they are used to everybody pinging them. Like, if you were in their world, you never ping anybody, because everybody is constantly trying to get in contact with you. So like, you kind of use that passive approach when you're constantly being dealt with that way historically. So they're not going to sort of change their MO just for you. So you got to put yourself in their shoes and live in their world. Now, what you're going to do next, so that's mid-funnel. Okay, fine. The definition of, in my opinion, the definition of no longer being mid-funnel is when they either give you, we would call it a verbal yes, or they would ask to see an example of your contract, or you start, I wouldn't even say start talking about pricing, because sometimes they like to talk about pricing earlier on, but I say if they want to see the actual example of your contract, or if they just give you the verbal yes. And here's the reason. We would mark that as verbal yes, and as soon as we got the verbal yes, we would begin the implementation process, where we would sort of co-manage the prospect with our implementation and account management team. Because can deals fall apart between the verbal yes and having the contract signed? Of course, there's a tremendous possibility for the deal to fall apart. In fact, even after the contract is closed and signed and you start supporting the client, the deal can still fall apart. So, you have to keep selling through this entire process. And you cannot, again, in my opinion, you cannot wait until the contract is signed before you start implementation. So what does that mean? You're going to start some implementations and you're going to end up not closing the sale, and the contract's not going to go through, because oftentimes you'll either have purchasing department or legal. There are other bureaucratic processes within and the larger the customer is, the more bureaucratic these processes are. And if you wait until the contract is signed to do implementation, we would have groups that would literally sign the contract the day before they were supposed to go live. I mean, and these were for very, multi-thousand, tens of thousands employee companies. So we did tons of implementation work before the contract was signed, but we did have the quote unquote verbal yes. So it's very important to have marked in your CRM, when do you have a verbal yes versus when do you have a signed contract. And obviously you're going to have the anticipated start date in there as well. And that anticipated start date might move too. Obviously, a lot of groups like their start date to be on the first of the year when their new plan year is. But if they started off cycle, then instead of starting in April, they might end up starting with May for nothing that has to do with you. It might be something on their own end that they're doing an HRIS implementation and they're having a whole bunch of hiccups with it, and they have to do all hands on deck for another month before they can implement, your solution. So in the next episode, we will discuss the selling through the implementation and contracting process, but that will be the end of our discussion today for the mid-funnel process for selling in healthcare. And again, this is Dr. Eric Bricker with AHealthcareZ. Thank you so much for giving me your time and attention, and I wish you all the best.